I always believed that the worst betrayals came from the ones you least suspected. But in my case, I should have seen it coming. It started with little things. My wife, Sarah, taking longer to return from work. Her mother, Carol, visiting more often, whispering things behind my back. Their laughter, sharp and mocking, whenever I passed by. I brushed it off. Families have inside jokes, right? Then, that night happened. I had gone down to the basement to grab a toolbox, just another mundane chore. The door clicked shut behind me, and I turned, expecting to see Sarah. Instead, it was Carol, standing there with a smirk. "Sit tight," she sneered. "Your wife is upstairs with a real man. Someone who can satisfy her. Unlike you." Her words sliced through me like a blade. My heart pounded as I lunged for the door, but she was faster, locking it from the outside. I slammed my fists against the wood. "Carol!" I shouted. "Open the damn door." Her laughter echoed through the thin walls. "Why don't you stay down here like a good little boy? Let Sarah enjoy herself. She deserves it." The rage that boiled inside me was unlike anything I had ever felt. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to think. Years ago, when we moved in, I had installed a second exit in case of emergencies, a rusted, forgotten door that led to the backyard. With shaking fingers, I fumbled through the dark, navigating the cluttered basement until I found the handle. It groaned as I pushed it open. The moment I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, clearing my thoughts. My body moved on instinct. I ran towards the back door of the house, slipping in through the kitchen. My heart pounded as I crept toward the living room. And that's when I saw them. Sarah. In our home. With another man. I didn't stop to think. Didn't pause to question. The next moments were a blur, his face twisted in shock, then in pain as I brought the heavy lamp crashing down on his head. He crumpled to the floor. Sarah screamed. I turned to her, my vision red. My fist connected with her cheek, sending her sprawling across the couch. Carol's voice shrieked from behind me, her footsteps pounding down the hall. I turned, grabbed a crowbar from the fireplace rack, and met her halfway. She didn't even get the chance to scream. Blood dripped onto the floor, pooling at my feet. My chest heaved as I stood over their crumpled bodies. And then, an idea began to take shape in my mind. This wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to make sure they truly paid. I stood in the dim glow of the living room, my breath ragged, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The room smelled of sweat, blood, and betrayal. Sarah lay on the couch, moaning in pain, clutching her cheek where I had struck her. Her lover, the real man her mother had taunted me about, was motionless on the floor, his head bent at an unnatural angle. Carol, the woman who had just locked me in my own basement like a stray dog, lay in a growing pool of her own blood. But I wasn't done. I had spent years being the joke. The man who worked hard, provided, loved unconditionally, only to be laughed at behind closed doors. They had mocked me, ridiculed me, played me for a fool. No. This wasn't over. Sarah groaned, shifting on the couch, her body trembling. "J. John." She whispered, her voice thick with fear. "Please." I knelt beside her, tilting my head. "Please what?" I asked, my voice calm, almost gentle. She flinched. It was a mistake. I swear, I let out a sharp laugh. "A mistake?" "No, a mistake is forgetting to turn off the stove. A mistake is misplacing your keys. This was intentional." I grabbed her by the jaw, forcing her to look at me. "You did this," I hissed. "You and her." My eyes darted toward her mother's lifeless body. "You thought you could humiliate me? Lock me in the basement while you screwed some random guy in my home. Her lip quivered. John. I'm sorry. I squeezed harder, feeling the delicate bones of her face beneath my grip. No, you're not. I let go, standing up as she coughed and gasped for air. My mind was spinning with possibilities. I could end it now. Call the police. Say it was self-defense. Or I could make this hurt more. I turned toward her unconscious lover, nudging him with my foot. No response. The hit had been hard, maybe too hard. I crouched down, pressing 2 fingers against his neck. Nothing. He was dead. Good. One less thing to worry about. I walked to the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of whiskey and taking a long swig. The burn in my throat barely registered. When I turned back, Sarah was trying to crawl toward her phone, her fingers fumbling desperately across the coffee table. I lunged, kicking the phone away before she could grab it. Aha, I scolded, wagging a finger. You don't get to call for help. Her eyes darted to the front door. I could see it in her face. The calculation. The survival instincts kicking in. She thought she could run. I smirked. Go ahead, I said, stepping aside. Run. She hesitated, unsure if it was a trick. Then, in a burst of panicked energy, she scrambled to her feet and sprinted toward the door. The moment she reached for the handle, I was behind her. My arm wrapped around her waist, yanking her back with such force that she stumbled, crashing onto the floor. Please, she sobbed. John, don't do this. I crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Do what, sweetheart? I whispered. What did you think was going to happen? That you'd laugh at me forever? That I'd just accept this? Her sobs grew louder, her body shaking. I smiled. They wanted to see a joke. I'd show them what happens when the joke stops laughing. And this was just the beginning. Sarah was still sobbing on the floor, her body trembling, her arms wrapped around herself like they could somehow protect her from what was coming next. I let her cry. I stood up, stretching my shoulders, rolling my neck. The adrenaline was still pumping, but now that the immediate rage had settled, I needed to think. There were 3 bodies in my house, 1 unconscious, 1 dead, and 1 that had made my life miserable for years. I had 2 options. Call the police. Tell them some insane story about self-defense. Maybe they'd believe me. Maybe they'd see the bruises, the rage, the betrayal, and call it justified. Or I could handle this my way. My lips curled into a slow smile. Sarah's eyes widened when she saw the change in me. She stopped sobbing for a moment, her breath hitching. John, what are you? I turned and walked toward the back of the house. Into the garage. The crowbar was still there, slick with Carol's blood. I grabbed a roll of duct tape. Some rope. A tarp. When I returned to the living room, Sarah was trying to wake up her lover, shaking him, whispering his name. He's dead, I said simply. She froze. Her hands hovered over his lifeless body, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. No, he's just. I took a step closer. She flinched. You did this, Sarah, I said, crouching down beside her. You and your mother. I reached out and gripped her chin, forcing her to look at me. You played me for a fool. You locked me in the basement while you spread your legs for him. Tears ran down her face, her lips trembling. I let go of her face and stood up, tapping the crowbar against my palm. But don't worry, I said. I'm not going to kill you. She stared up at me, confused, terrified. I smiled down at her. No, I whispered. That would be too easy. I grabbed her by the wrist and yanked her to her feet. She yelped, struggling, but I was stronger. She always thought of me as weak. A joke. She wasn't laughing now. "John, please," she sobbed. "I'll do anything, just, please don't." I pressed my finger to her lips. "Shoo." Then, I wrapped the duct tape around her wrists. Tight. Her breathing came fast and uneven. She was on the verge of hyperventilating. "Good. John, please, we can fix this. We can talk." I laughed. "Fix this? Oh, sweetheart. There's no fixing this." I shoved her down onto the couch, securing her ankles next. She thrashed, but she wasn't going anywhere. Then I grabbed my phone. What are you doing?" she stammered. I pulled up my contacts. Dialed. After 2 rings, he picked up. "Hey, buddy," I said, keeping my voice light. "I need a favor." Sarah's eyes widened. She shook her head violently, her muffled screams against the duct tape filling the room. I turned away from her, grinning. This was going to be fun. The phone buzzed against my ear as I listened to the deep voice on the other end. "John." "Yeah, man," I said casually, as if this was just another day. "I've got a little situation. Need your help." There was a pause. Then a low chuckle. "You sound different," he said. "What kind of situation?" I glanced at Sarah, tied up and trembling on the couch, her eyes pleading with me. Her breath was ragged, her whole body shaking. I could see it in her face. She knew she had pushed me too far. "I'll explain when you get here," I said. "Can you come by?" Another pause. Then, "Give me an hour." I hung up. Sarah's muffled cries broke through the silence as she thrashed against the restraints. She was saying something, though the duct tape swallowed most of it. "Shoo," I said, tilting my head as I watched her struggle. "You don't want to tire yourself out, sweetheart. We've got a long night ahead." Her body sagged against the couch as she let out a choked sob. I turned away, my mind spinning through the next steps. The body. The house. The fact that Sarah still had to suffer before this was over. I had been too kind to her for too long. Carol had gotten a quick way out. The lover? Well, I hadn't meant to kill him that fast, but no regrets there. Sarah, though. Sarah needed to feel it. I sat in the armchair across from her, watching her breathe, her chest rising and falling in sharp, panicked gasps. "Do you know what the worst part is?" I asked, leaning forward, elbows on my knees. She didn't respond. Not that she could. I smiled. "It's not the cheating," I said. "Not the lying. It's not even the fact that you let her," I nodded toward Carol's corpse, still sprawled in the corner, "lock me in the basement like some stray dog." Sarah's eyes were wide, wet with terror. I leaned closer. "The worst part," I whispered, "is that you laughed at me." I could see the realization dawn in her face. The jokes. The sideways glances. The secret phone calls I was never meant to overhear. She knew what I was talking about. "I bet you and your mother had a great time making fun of me," I continued, shaking my head. How pathetic I was. How boring. How incapable. A fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. She knew. She knew exactly what I was talking about. I sat back inside, running a hand through my hair. "Well," I said, stretching my arms, "I think it's only fair I return the favor." Sarah whimpered. I grinned. A knock at the door made her entire body jolt. Right on time. I stood up, glancing back at her before heading for the door. "Now, sweetheart," I called over my shoulder, "be polite. We have company." She let out a desperate, muffled scream as I opened the door. And there he was. Ethan. Tall, broad, dark-eyed. A man who knew how to make problems disappear. He took one look at my face and smirked. Guessing this ain't about poker night. I chuckled, stepping aside to let him in. Not quite. His eyes swept across the room, landing on Sarah, bound, crying, panicked. Then on the lifeless body of her lover. Then Carol. He let out a low whistle. Damn, John. I shut the door behind him. Yeah, I said, rolling my shoulders. Things got a little messy. Ethan stepped further in, examining the scene. His expression was unreadable, but I could tell he was thinking. Calculating. Finally, he looked at me. What's the play here? I exhaled. I need this cleaned up. And her, I nodded toward Sarah. She's not getting off easy. Ethan's smirk grew. Oh. I nodded. I want her to feel what I felt. Sarah let out another muffled scream, her body convulsing in panic. Ethan chuckled, rubbing his jaw. Well then, he said, cracking his knuckles. Let's get started. Ethan walked toward Sarah, his boots thudding against the hardwood floor. She flinched, trying to shrink back into the couch, her bound wrists trembling as she shook her head violently, muffled cries spilling from behind the duct tape. He crouched in front of her, tilting his head like he was inspecting a piece of meat. She's terrified, he said, amused. I smiled. Good. Ethan looked over at the dead body on the floor, the real man, the one Sarah and Carol had mocked me over. You did that? He asked. I nodded. One hit. He went down like a sack of bricks. Ethan let out a low whistle. Didn't know you had it in you. I shrugged. Neither did I. Sarah whimpered again, her eyes darting between the two of us, desperate for a miracle that wasn't coming. Ethan leaned in closer to her. Now, sweetheart, he said softly, his voice almost gentle, your husband here has been real patient with you. She shook her head furiously, tears spilling down her cheeks. But see. Ethan reached forward, brushing a strand of hair from her sweat-drenched forehead. She recoiled at his touch. Patience runs out. I watched as she sobbed, her chest rising and falling in panicked gasps. I could have stopped this. Could have told Ethan to leave. Could have walked away. But I didn't want to. She had to suffer. I stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Not yet, I said. He raised an eyebrow at me. I turned my attention back to Sarah, crouching so I was eye level with her. I want to hear you say it, I whispered. She blinked rapidly, confused. I reached forward and ripped the duct tape from her mouth. She let out a sharp cry, coughing as she gasped for air. Say it, I repeated, my voice calm. Please, she stammered, her voice hoarse. John, I made a mistake, I grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her to look at me. Not that, I said, my voice a growl. Tell me what you and your mother used to say about me. Say it to my face. Her bottom lip trembled. John. Say it. She sobbed, shaking her head, but I tightened my grip. She swallowed hard, her breathing uneven. Then, in a broken whisper, she finally said it. You're not a real man. The words made my blood boil all over again. Ethan chuckled behind me. Damn. She really did think you were a joke, huh? I let go of her chin, standing up. Not anymore, I muttered. Sarah gasped for breath, her whole body shaking. Please, she whimpered. John, I love you. I laughed. I actually laughed. You don't love me, I said. You loved controlling me. You loved humiliating me. I stepped back, running a hand through my hair. But now it's my turn. Sarah let out another sob. Ethan cracked his knuckles. So what's next, Johnny boy? I looked at him, then at Sarah. And I smiled. I have a plan. Sarah sobbed, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I could see the pure terror in her eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with love, or at least I thought they had. Now they were wide, desperate, searching for a way out. There wasn't one. Ethan stood beside me, hands in his pockets, watching her like a cat watches a trapped mouse. He was enjoying this. So, he said, breaking the silence, "What's the plan, Johnny boy?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. Rage had brought me this far, but rage alone wasn't enough. I needed control. I needed to make this count. First, we clean up, I said, nodding toward the lifeless body on the floor. The so-called real man. He wasn't looking so real anymore. Just a mess I needed to get rid of. Ethan smirked. And the wife? I turned back to Sarah, crouching in front of her. "Oh, she's not going anywhere," I murmured. Her whole body flinched at my words. "Please, John," she sobbed. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Just let me go. I swear, I'll do whatever you want. I held up a finger, silencing her. "You will do whatever I want," I said. "But not because I'm letting you go." I let the words sink in before standing up. "Ethan," I said, "let's move the body." Sarah let out a wretched sob as we got to work. An unfinished grave. Dragging the lifeless weight across the hardwood was harder than I thought. He was dead weight, literally. "Backyard?" Ethan asked, slightly out of breath. I shook my head. Too obvious. We needed something better. Somewhere no one would think to check. Then it hit me. "The woods," I said. Ethan grinned. "I like the way you think." We loaded the body into the trunk of my car, wrapping him in an old tarp. Sarah was left in the living room, still tied up, still sobbing. I didn't bother comforting her. She didn't deserve comfort. The drive was quiet. The two of us had done things before, small things, things no one ever found out about. But this? This was big. "You sure about this?" Ethan asked after a few miles of silence. I kept my eyes on the road. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He let out a low chuckle. "Atta boy." It didn't take long to reach the woods. A place we used to camp, hunt, drink when we were younger. Back when I was still the joke. Not anymore. We found a clearing, dug a hole. The dirt was damp, heavy, clinging to the shovel like it wanted to fight back. But we kept digging. And when it was deep enough, we rolled the body in. A real man, reduced to nothing but forgotten bones under the earth. I stood over the grave, breathing hard, my hands raw from the shovel. "One down," I muttered. Ethan clapped me on the back. "And one to go." I smirked. "No," I said. "She doesn't get to die." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Then what?" I turned back toward the car, toward the distant glow of home. "We make her pay." By the time we got back, the house was silent. Too silent. For a second, my chest tightened. Then I stepped inside and saw her, right where I left her. Sarah was still bound to the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She had stopped struggling, stopped screaming. Now, she just sat there, shaking, staring blankly at the wall. Good. She was breaking. Ethan shut the door behind us and let out a low whistle. Damn. Thought she might have tried to chew her way out. I walked over to her, crouching so we were eye level. Did you think about running? I asked softly. Her lip quivered. She shook her head. I smiled. Smart girl. Then I grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at me. Do you know why you're still alive, Sarah? She swallowed hard. Be because you love me, she whispered. Ethan let out a sharp bark of laughter. I just grinned. No, sweetheart. I leaned in, letting my breath ghost against her ear. Because I want you to suffer. She let out a broken sob. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water. Ethan, I said over my shoulder, untie her. Sarah flinched as Ethan stepped forward, but she didn't fight as he cut the ropes from her wrists and ankles. She collapsed forward, rubbing her numb hands, gasping from the blood rushing back into her limbs. I took a sip of my water, watching her. You always thought I was weak, I murmured. She looked up at me, eyes wide with fear. You and your mother, I continued. Laughing at me. Mocking me. Thinking I'd never do anything about it. Tears spilled down her face. John. I threw the glass against the wall. She screamed as shards of glass rained to the floor. I loved you. I shouted. I gave you everything. And you repaid me by locking me in a basement while you screwed another man in my house. She covered her face, sobbing. I'm sorry. No, you're not. I turned away, running a hand through my hair. I had to stay in control. Think, John. Think. Killing her would be easy. But she deserved worse. Something she'd never come back from. Ethan stepped up beside me, arms crossed. So, what's next? I exhaled slowly. We ruin her life. Sarah's head snapped up. I crouched in front of her again, smiling. You're going to tell everyone what you did, I said. She blinked, confused. What? I grabbed my phone and unlocked it. We're going to record a little video, I said. You're going to confess. You're going to tell the whole world what a lying, cheating, pathetic excuse for a wife you are. She shook her head violently. No, John, please. I grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard. Or we can go with Plan B. Her breath hitched. Plan B. I leaned in. You disappear, I whispered. No one will ever hear from you again. She let out a soft, broken gasp. I smirked. Your choice, sweetheart. For a long moment, she just sat there, trembling. Then, finally, she nodded. Good girl, I murmured. I lifted my phone, hit record. And Sarah began to confess. Sarah sniffled, her entire body shaking. She kept glancing at Ethan, at me, at the phone I held in front of her. Start talking, I ordered. She swallowed hard, then licked her cracked lips. And my name is Sarah, she stammered, her voice hoarse from crying. I nodded, encouraging her. And her voice caught, but I gave her a sharp look, and she continued. I cheated on my husband. She let out a sob. I humiliated him. I laughed at him behind his back. I let my mother, she hiccuped, wiping her nose on her sleeve. I let my mother lock him in the basement while I. Say it, I commanded. She let out a sharp cry, then forced herself to continue. While I slept with another man. I smirked. Ethan let out a low whistle. Oof. That's rough, he muttered. Sarah sobbed harder. John, please. I did what you asked. Please, just let me go. I lowered the phone, watching her. She really thought it would be that easy. Not yet, I said. Her face twisted in horror. What do you mean? You said if I confessed. I crouched in front of her again. I said I wanted the world to hear the truth. I held up my phone. And now, sweetheart, I think we should send it. Her breath hitched. No. John, please. She lunged toward me, but Ethan grabbed her from behind, holding her in place. You can't. My job, my friends. Your reputation. I sneered. You should have thought about that before you spread your legs for another man. She let out a heartbroken scream as I tapped the screen and sent the video. To everyone. Her family. My family. Her work. Our friends. Everyone who ever mattered to her. The message was simple: this is what my wife has been doing behind my back. Sarah thrashed in Ethan's grip. You ruined me, she shrieked. I grinned. No, sweetheart. You did this to yourself. She let out a strangled sob, her body sagging in defeat. I have nothing now, she whispered. No job. No friends. No family. She shook her head. I have nothing. I leaned in, my voice a low murmur. Now you know how it feels. She whimpered. I stood up, turning to Ethan. Take her upstairs. He nodded, dragging her limp body toward the stairs. She didn't fight anymore. She was done. I watched them go, listening to her broken sobs fade into the distance. For the first time in years, I felt peace. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Sarah still had more to lose. And I was going to take everything. Ethan dragged Sarah up the stairs, her body limp, her sobs quiet. She had stopped fighting. Stopped begging. She was broken. Good. I followed them, my footsteps slow and deliberate. The house was eerily silent now, except for Sarah's shaky breaths. Ethan pushed open the bedroom door and tossed her onto the bed like a discarded doll. She barely reacted. Just curled into herself, staring at nothing. She's done, Ethan muttered, wiping his hands on his jeans. What now? I stood at the doorway, staring at her. For years, I had loved this woman. Built a life with her. Trusted her. And she had thrown it away, mocked me, humiliated me, treated me like a joke. Now, she had nothing. No job. No reputation. No mother to protect her. No lover. Nothing but the weight of her own betrayal. And yet, I wasn't satisfied. Sarah, I said. She flinched. Slowly, she lifted her head, her bloodshot eyes meeting mine. I want a divorce. Her breath hitched. Ethan smirked. There it is. Sarah sat up, her hands trembling. John, please. I tilted my head. Please what? She swallowed hard. Please, don't do this. I let out a sharp laugh. Don't do this. Sarah, you ended this marriage the moment you let another man touch you. She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. No. We can fix this. I crossed my arms. Oh. And tell me, sweetheart, how do we fix the fact that you locked me in the basement while you screwed another man? She sobbed. I was stupid. I wasn't thinking. I scoffed. No. You were thinking. You just thought you'd never get caught. Her face crumpled. I love you, John. I stepped forward, looming over her. No, you loved the version of me you could control. The one who let you and your mother laugh at him. The one who worked his *** off while you betrayed him. I exhaled sharply. Well, sweetheart, that version of me is dead. Her lips quivered. What's going to happen to me? She whispered. I smiled. You'll find out soon enough. Her whole body shuddered. I turned to Ethan. Make sure she signs the papers. Ethan grinned. With pleasure. Sarah let out a broken cry as I walked out of the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I didn't look back. For the first time in years. I was free. I walked downstairs, leaving Sarah sobbing in the bedroom. The weight on my chest, the one I had carried for years, was finally gone. Ethan followed a few minutes later, holding a stack of papers. She signed. I smirked. Of course she did. He chuckled, tossing the documents onto the kitchen table. So, that's it, huh? I grabbed a glass, poured myself a drink, and swirled the liquid in my hand. Not yet. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You still got more in you. I exhaled, setting the glass down. One last thing. I pulled out my phone and opened our joint bank account. Correction, my former joint bank account. With a few taps, I transferred everything out. Every last cent. Sarah was already ruined. This was just the final nail in the coffin. When I was done, I leaned back, satisfied. Now, it's over. Ethan whistled. Damn. Cold-blooded. I chuckled. She earned it. A soft noise came from upstairs. Sarah. I didn't bother going to check. She wasn't my problem anymore. I grabbed my coat, glanced around the house one last time, then headed for the front door. Ethan followed. You sure you don't wanna? He made a vague gesture toward the house. I mean, she's got nothing now. I shrugged. Not my concern. He studied me for a second, then nodded. Fair enough. I stepped outside, breathing in the cold night air. This place, this house, this life, it was behind me now. I smiled. For the first time in forever, I wasn't the fool. I wasn't the joke. I was free. And I was never looking back.